a lot of familiar faces here. Like Zandy said, I'm in the Southeast Archaeological Center. We are part of the regional office in this, for the National Park Service. We handle all of the archaeology for the entire Southeast. So that's everything from South Florida up to Kentucky, North Carolina, Louisiana, and of course, here in Puerto Rico. We have about 40 people in our office, and about half of them are curatorial, so they work in museum collections. They deal with our archives, they deal with all the artifacts that we dig up, that we don't, but the parks say, you hold on to them for us, we don't have the space for them. We also do a lot of work looking at the effects of climate change on archaeological sites, especially in South Florida. We have a huge program looking at the effects of rising sea levels in Miami, Canaveral, the Everglades, all that whole area down in South Florida. They've got a really big problem that's unavoidable. It's happening. There's not a lot they can do about it. So they're trying to look at what's the best way to protect what few sites that they can actually target for protection, because they're not going to be able to save all of them. We also have a branch that assists other federal agencies. So like Fish and Wildlife Service, the Army, Navy, U.S. Coast Guard. We provide assistance to all of those federal agencies who don't necessarily have an archaeologist. Their focus is military or trees, forestry, all that kind of stuff. Their effort many times is not really in culture resources, so we provide that support as well. And we also provide, we also occasionally get to do some fun stuff, some research. We get to partner with groups from around the world, and one of them I've talked about before here for the last couple of years. I'm going to give a brief refresher about what the Slave Wrecks Project is, and then why we're moving from the water onto the land. Like what's the point? The whole purpose of the project was originally looking for ships that sank carrying slaves, and now I'll go into it in just a little bit, but we realized, the Smithsonian realized, George Washington University realized that that was a bit of a narrow focus. We need to broaden out that research focus. Can you all hear me without the mic? Yeah? Okay. Good.
If you want the light, one light drop down, can everybody see it? We've got all the lights on, we can turn one row of lights off.
You good?
You know what you turn one row?
Better? Okay. So why do we even do archaeology? Really quick, I'm not going to read all of that, but that's our mandate. Called the Organic Act. You're hearing a lot about it in the news lately. There's a push. I'll go on and going out there and say it. There's a push to maybe privatize public lands right now. We're seeing a bill starting to move its way through Congress, but this is our mandate. We're supposed to preserve and protect for future generations. And then our very specific mission, dealing with natural and cultural resources, preserve, protect, and interpret for today and tomorrow, for recreation, and just for preservation purposes. So how did the National Park Service get involved as a partner with Slave Wrecks Project? There's a lot of partners from around the world. The Park Service is seen as one of the standard bearers for historic preservation around the world. We are consistently called on for assistance from Greece, Turkey, Kazakhstan, all over the place, wanting our expertise to help. How do you manage a park? How do you set up a park? How do you enforce the laws? How do you keep looters from stealing from archaeological sites? We provide that kind of assistance. So many years ago, underwater archaeologist who's in charge of the Submerged Resources Center, they get to go out and dive all the shipwrecks all around the world that are managed, that are in Park Service waters. He went to graduate school with an archaeologist at George Washington University, whose baby this is. The Slave Wrecks Project is Dr. Steve Wilkeman's brainchild. They said, hey, wouldn't it be wonderful if we went out, we put out this emphasis to identify the ships that crashed and wrecked on reefs and say carrying slaves, because it was the one research area that had never been investigated really wholeheartedly by underwater archaeologists. You have the emphasis in gold and the tocha or Civil War submarines and all this other kinds of stuff that seems really sexy, but no one really wanted to touch a slave wreck. So they said, let's do it. Let's create a program in countries in Africa where we can build capacity, where we can train people there in these countries to actually do cultural resource management for themselves, and then you cut the tie and you say, and you're off. So that's how this began. These are the partners. I believe Diving with a Purpose is going to be here. They're flying in Sunday, and they're gonna be here on St. Croix for 10 days. They're moving, Diving with a Purpose has worked in many national parks in the southeast, and now they're looking to start assisting the parks here in the Virgin Islands. It's the National Association of Black Scuba Divers. So these are professionals, rocket scientists, neurosurgeons, pediatricians. They're not archaeologists, but they all come together, they get trained, and they spend a few days helping do archaeology on shipwrecks, on submerged resources in Biscayne National Park, Canaveral, National Seashore, Dry Tortugas, and now they're looking to come here. So this is the mission of the Slave Wrecks Project. Combine research, training, capacity building, and education to create new scholarship and knowledge. And then we build stewardship. I mentioned a little bit about how the work that they've done in Biscayne National Park. It's actually been recognized nationally, gotten national awards, bringing in youth, teaching youth how to scuba dive, and then teaching these kids, junior high, high school, and college kids from the Miami urban area about underwater archaeological protection. So we decided to move a couple of years ago, switch some of the effort away from Biscayne National Park, where they have many, many, many shipwrecks, and come down here to St. Croix. You all know the dates of these buildings. And our emphasis really began to turn towards this building, the Danish West Indian Gaming Company warehouse, and towards Buck Island. And as we said before, we knew of at least documentation of 2 ships that hit the reef and sank, or at least were salvaged and then left to go ahead and deteriorate at Buck Island. This gives you an idea of how many shipwrecks are just around St. Croix. And these are the 2 wrecks that we know went down at Buck Island. We have the Mary, 1797, carrying 266 enslaved when they left Africa. 244 survived, at least on the books when they arrived here in St. Croix. General Abercrombie, 1803, 377. There's another inventory that I believe says 266. So we have to get those 2 different sets of numbers. We have to figure out which one of those is correct. Now, on neither of these wrecks did any slaves actually die. Everyone lived. They were all taken off the ships and then gone on and sold elsewhere. We don't have much documentation about what happened with the Mare. We do have some documentation about what happened with the General Abercrombie. So the one area of research, if anyone's looking for a research topic, students, would be to go through archives and start finding out what's the story of the Mare. So we've had a whole series of public meetings. I'm sure many of you guys have been at them. Our first one was just to introduce slave wrecks. That Smithsonian, that George Washington University National Park Service was coming here to start doing this research. And let's just say the first round of meetings was very interesting because, as you can see, not typically people you would associate investigating slavery. These are typical archaeologists who, quite frankly, are all white. Okay, so we heard opinions about why is this? And we had to respond, well, this is why we're doing this. This is phase 1. We're coming out here identifying. Phase 2 is start working with local youth, start working with local people, provide that training, start building that local capacity here. So on our first few trips, we came here and started running magnetometer survey. I'll give a quick refresher on what all we did. See, the south side is nice and open. That's the way ships should be going, traveling. And then you go up here on the north side. You all know it well. It's just nothing but reef. And you don't want to be taking your boat up there. But unfortunately, the General Abercrombie went up that way in 1803. Because that's what you got to deal with. It's haystack corals. They don't look like much from the top, but then you hit it and you have a giant hole in your hull. So we began running magnetometer, dragging it behind the boat. These are the guys from the Submerged Resources Center. This is our research area. We've divided up into different priority areas. We've actually now completed, I'd say 99% of all of our survey areas from Buck Island to a depth of 60 feet. So we have actually run magnetometer across most of the water surrounding Buck Island, only to a depth of 60 feet. That's about as far as we're going to go as far as our search for any shipwrecks in Buck Island's waters. That's what it looks like. Just lines go back. It's like you're mowing the lawn, it's going back and forth and back and forth. It's weeks of monotonous, just back and forth, and it's not fun when it's 3 to 4 foot. As you can see it, I'll just say that. So every one of those little blue dots is an anomaly. Okay, it's a hit. Something metal is down there. We have to go dive it. It's a little easier to see there. That's after the end. Yeah, that's the end of our May 2015 survey. So, already said that we've successfully surveyed 8.5 square miles. It's an idea of all of the anomalies from both years. So 293 targets were found just at Buck Island, and we only have 66 left to either snorkel or scuba dive to verify, is it part of a ship? Is it a tire? Is it a camera? We have found digital cameras down there. We found all kinds of stuff down there, old fish pots and traps and all kinds of things. Yeah, we found at least one, maybe 2. But of course, we do find this occasionally. We do find anchors. We have 2 anchors right next to each other. The one closest to the one in the forescreen is that is the Admiralty anchor. I can't remember the entire name of it right now, sorry, I'm having a blank. It actually dates to about the right time period for the General Abercrombie. Can't say it is the Abercrombie. It doesn't have a stamp that says I'm the General Abercrombie on it. It's the right time period. The one behind it is a little bit later. So we know that one is not part of the General Abercrombie shipwreck. We do need to come back and do a very systematic search of the waters to see if there's any more parts of the ship that could be also dated to that time period. There's a close-up of the other anchor, the Persian anchor. And then of course we found all kinds of other stuff. We found lots of chain, very tight chain. Looks like it was set. And at the end of it was another anchor. And we found more chain, a lot more chain, which is of course is tight and it's set to another anchor. So we've been down, we've taken very basic measurements on it. We've been able to get basic time periods of manufacture for these anchors. That's about all we can do with this right now. So how do we tie Buck Island Shipwreck Survey to Christiansted? Well, the building we're sitting in here was originally part of the Getting Company warehouse complex. See here, 1754. Not that these maps are 100% accurate. You're not seeing that there's other buildings on these city blocks. You're not seeing anything else that's going on here, but you can see these main governmental and company buildings down here in the wharf area. And you see our building here, E. But you don't see anything else going on out here. Here we are, 1760, same kind of diagram, but again, like all the buildings are missing from the streets surrounding it. So we know sometimes you have to watch it with historic maps. They don't have everything on there. They only have what they're targeting, what the purpose of making that map is. It's kind of like history. You have to watch out what history you read because it depends on who wrote it. But by 1779, you're getting really detailed maps about what's going on. So, here we are. We're in here. You know, this should be Hospital Street, but it's not. There's no Hospital Street at that point. And then you have slave quarters over here. You have your entrance into your whole courtyard area, and lots of different structures, lots of different activities are going on. Right across the street, going up about halfway up to the fort.
And no customs house.
And no, well, you have a ground floor. You have a ground floor. It's a little different. You don't have a big 2-story building with the welcoming arms and all of that stuff. Okay, but by 1803, you got Hospital Street coming through. And you can see, I don't know if all y'all can see they've kind of gone in and erased what used to be here. This used to be the baking house and the oven. And now they've moved it over to here, over near where the signs are when you first cross the street over here. Now Hospital Street, you still have the ground floor of the customs house, and now your slave quarters have moved over to here. So we're beginning to tie what happened as you're importing slaves from all over Africa, bringing them up from down island, from other places around in the Caribbean. They're being brought here. Some of them are being sold here. Some of them are being sold in other slave auction areas all around Christiansted and in other places. But this is one of the places where they were sold. And some of them actually ended up getting bought and living here and supporting the work that was going on here at the complex. So one of our focuses for moving from the water to the land was say, well, how do we follow that trajectory of enslavement? How do we take people from the ship onto the land? How do we follow them through time? How do we investigate that legacy of the result of 200, 300, 400 years of enslavement that's resulted in many of the cultural things that you're seeing going on today? You can track it all the way back to here and start to say, okay, we need to, we can begin to uncover some of these stories about the people who are living here and put a face to those people. So here we are with an overlay with the buildings today. You can see the modern customs house. Just to kind of drive the point home, here's that original bake oven, and then here are those slave quarters. And here it is with a nice aerial overlay, because you can really get into your head. So in December, I brought a team down from SEAC. We were doing a different project. We were taking out that tree over the steeple building. And we said, you know what, while we're here, we've got all the guys with all the GPR equipment. Let's run the GPR everywhere we can while we have time to see if we can see any remaining structures that could be related to the Guinea Company warehouse complex and identify where those slave structures were. So we did. We set up grids. We shut down Hospital Street for a couple of hours. We ran up the Hospital Street. And this is our grid area. We covered a large chunk of the grounds here at Christiansted. So we can start to create overlays with historic maps with the results of the ground penetrating radar. And the park really likes it because all of these lines are utility lines. So now they know where all their buried power lines and their sprinkler systems and all of that stuff is. So maintenance is really happy with this kind of stuff because now they know where they can and cannot dig. But we like it because it identifies anomalies under the ground surface. You can read the radar data, get below that, get below those utility lines and see, okay, there's something going on and it's really down, it's deep down below and it's lining up with the historic maps. Let's target our investigations there instead of just kind of testing all around and hope that we get something. So here we go. Anomalies are 35 centimeters below the surface on the 1779 map. You see there's stuff lining up here. There's something round here. We don't know what that is. There's nothing round on any of these historic maps. So we've identified that for future research. We've got an anomaly going on here with some of these slave structures down here. At 52 centimeters, you can still see those anomalies are still there. So something has structure, so something's really there. And here we are. Okay, so here are our GPR guru guy identified the actual places. He said target these places. So that's why we placed our excavation units where they are. And then here it is with the 1803 map. You can see a little better. Some of these anomalies are actually seem to be lining up with some of these walls here for the 1803 slave structures. So it lines up a little better with the 1803, which you might expect if they were tearing down the old stuff in the 1770s and then building on top of it in the early 1800s. So again, lining it up with this target saying, focus here. So then we began digging this summer. First summer, working with students from the University of Virgin Islands, and asked everyone here to stand up when I call your name. We got people from Denmark, we got people from Texas. Tonight we have Jordan Broadhurst from the University of Virgin Islands. We got Megan Park from San Antonio, Texas. Yeah. And we've got Ida Vestergaard from Aarhus in Denmark. Yeah. And we have two more UVI students who cannot be here tonight. Akeem McIntosh, who's been around working at this park now for about a year and a half, volunteering, been an intern for a long time. A year in July. Yep. And then Miss Tiara DaCosta She cannot be here tonight, but she is a part of the team. And then from SEAC, we've got archaeologist Ms. Michelle Gray. And then he had to go home a week early, but also Eric Bezemek, another archaeologist in the Southeast Archaeological Center, was down here for much of the summer. So here we are, introducing everyone. We introduced everyone on Facebook. But we didn't start off digging here. We said, okay, how do we introduce people who've never done archaeology before into archaeology? So we said, you know what? We've got a project that needs to happen. This is where we can combine research and our compliance requirement, legal needs for other activities going on in other parts, together as a learning, as a chance to have a teaching moment. So we went to Salt River. What we have is a well tower that looks like it is being undercut and being impacted by severe storm events when there's a lot of rain or water rushing by it. It's in the bush. It's not really open for public yet. What we're trying to do is stabilize the bank, get it safe, and then we will be creating hiking trails and interpretive waysides so that then it'll be open to the public. So we can start to tell a little more of the industrial and agricultural stories for here on St. Croix, especially for well towers, because I know I'm trying to wrap my brain about, well, what is this? And you only see a few of these around the island, and what do they do? What purpose do they serve? You know, it's not a windmill, so where is it moving water from? Where is it taking it to? So we'll be telling that story in the next few years as we stabilize the structure. But we had to do archaeology before we could actually start to stabilize the structure.
I just had a little question. Have you determined how old that is?
We believe, don't quote me on this, but we believe it's third quarter of the 1700s, but we're not sure. Mr. David Hayes would have a better idea about this construction stuff, but that's kind of where we're going with it. So maybe 1800.
I'll just add that if you look at Morningstar inventories, you see it being constructed in the 1700s.
All right, there you go. 1700.
Okay. Thank you, George. It's gonna be a fabulous
It's going to be cool.
place to visit.
Yeah.
But not yet, don't go looking for it.
So we do archaeological survey, and it turns out that many years ago, late 1980s, an archaeologist named Alfredo Figueredo was here. He did archaeology out here. He did some testing, not at the well tower, but a little to the north. And he didn't find a whole lot up there. So we said, you know what, let's actually look at the well tower and see what's on there. So we did. We walked around and we realized, oh wow, there's so many crowds around here, and they've dug up the whole place. Shovel testing really isn't necessary. We can look at the dirt from the crowd holes. But as we're walking around, Zandy points out, hey, we found a whole thing of stones. It might be a well. It's on the other side of the gap. Let's go look at it. So we went and looked at it. And cleared it off. We took measurements, and we found the well. Okay. We didn't dig into it. We got off all of the trash from the surface and everything. But we've been able to identify it. We've been able to identify it. Let me go back one. This thing right here, what they're measuring is actually a foundation for a pump. And what it looks like is that the well was probably built or dug at the same time as the well tower, and then these pump foundations were put in much later, like in the early 1900s, and there's a whole series of those as well. So this complex, these buildings were used over and over and over for a very long time. Nobody really knows about it. And then we're going off in the bush. Years ago, Zandy and I were wandering around just saying, hey, let's go on a survey and see if there's any more ruins out here in the bush near the well tower. And we found a wall, completely overgrown, covered in vines, same kind of construction as the well tower and the well. And then we lost it for a few years. And so this summer we refound it. We've identified it, taken GPS points. Hopefully we'll go back in a few years and try to take off the dirt and see what it actually is, because you don't just have a wall in the middle of the bush. You know, it's forest structure. It's not a structure there. So this was our opportunity to work with the interns to teach about the basics about excavation, the basics about measuring, the basics about mapping, how you do a walking survey, a pedestrian survey. It's a good chance to slowly introduce people to what it means to actually dig in a very controlled scientific way in the dirt. So then we came back over here and we said, okay, now let's focus our attention let's look at where the results of the GPR and the overlaying with the historic maps. And then we also used the results of Miss Odewale shovel testing survey from a year and a half ago? A year ago?
Exactly.
Huh?
January.
Okay. So she had areas, artifact concentration that she's going to talk about here in just a minute. So we started opening it up. We taught the students how to nice and neatly layout a square using the Pythagorean theorem. You got to use that math sometimes as you get older. And then how to dig in very controlled levels. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So what we end up finding is potential remains of structure, of rubble walls, that are in the right place for the slate buildings here. Ms. Odewale will probably talk about the results of her excavations this summer, so I won't go too much into it. I will just say we found something really interesting that really kind of matches up and lines up with this building right here. She's going to talk all about it.
Spoiler.
Spoiler! Yeah, I didn't say that else. So we've also been, as we've been excavating the artifacts, we've been working with the YCC kids. They've been helping wash artifacts, they've been helping us wash the dirt. So we don't just screen dirt like you see out here and pull out artifacts. We also take out big column samples, big bags of dirt, and we put it through a really fine mesh sieve to try to get all the really tiny things, the tiny bones, the fish bones, the seeds, the other tiny beads, things that would fall through a regular size screen, things that actually tell us much more about the everyday lives of people that are living here. Because it would really, if you don't take those kind of measures to identify all of that kind of stuff, you really get a very biased view of how people were living. They only have big stuff, they don't have big stuff. They didn't eat tiny fish or little tiny pieces of things. They didn't buy tiny pieces of things. So that's a lot of stuff. We're closing up our excavations tomorrow. Tomorrow's the backfill day. Luckily, we've got the YCC kids to help, because that's a big pile of dirt up there. It's not fun. It's not fun to do. It does look like we are returning next year. It looks like we've got the funding. Our funding came from the Civil Rights Initiative that's come out of Washington, out of the Secretary of the Interior's initiative to study civil rights, to study and to take it all the way through Reconstruction. So it looks like this project is the top of the list for funding for next fiscal year, given we'll see what's going on with our government and the elections. But we're definitely looking forward to coming back, working with UVI, bringing in more students, teaching a new crop of interns all about archaeology and history here on the island. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Ms. Alicia. Do you have a question? Huh? Oh, there you are. Hi. Stand up, please.
Tiara.
She made it. Miss Tiara DaCosta. All right.
Before we go to Alicia, keep going. Alicia, come, don't stop so long. I just want to say that a very big and important part of this is working with Dr. Chinzira at UVI and with her group. She was directly involved in helping us identify students that would have some interest in history, anthropology, archaeology, and it would just be wonderful for UVI to be able to create a program that students could have an opportunity to not just study anthropology and archaeology, but put it to work right here. Work with our fabulous historians, work with our library folks. There's a whole other program that we'll do that we'll get Akeem to talk about what he's doing for the Transfer Day Centenary to work with elders and collect oral histories. So he's just totally broadened his scope, talking to people from 99 years old, 80 years old, 85 years old. If you have anyone you think that could help build that history, let me know. We'll put Akeem in touch with them. But working with the UVI students, working with Jordan, Tiara, engaging our new, we have a huge potential to continue with the University of Aarhus. Gita is working on her master's, may turn into a PhD, but her professor and I have connected, so we may have some more Danish connection here. And then one thing that's very important about Megan is she's our second cultural resource diversity intern, and they come funded directly out of Washington, D.C. So we can't, I mean, this is so many multiple partners all coming together because what do we have here in St. Croix? The most amazing resources. So we have to discover them. Anyway, and Alicia is back and she's almost done. And we soon will be able to call her soon Dr. Alicia Odewale.
Hi everyone. I'm Alicia Odewale. I'm a PhD candidate from the University of Tulsa in Oklahoma.
Alicia, maybe you use the microphone.
I use
Oh, come on, you can do it.
Can you hear me? I turned it on. Okay, so today I'm going to address some of the interpretations that I'm finding from an urban slavery perspective. And this is partially from my dissertation, partially giving you an update on the previous excavation that we did last year, that we've actually done analysis on those artifacts. So just to give you an idea of how this all got started, this project kind of got jump-started in January of 2015. Dr. Hardy already mentioned the shovel test that we conducted, and those were conducted with myself, my advisor, Dr. Thomas Foster, also from the University of Tulsa, and our former Cultural Resource Program Manager, Dr. Torres. So we're all working together in partnership to kind of jumpstart this project and really focus on just a phase 1 survey and trying to identify the location and the boundaries potentially of where these enslaved African residences were connected to this Dave Coast Indian Company warehouse. And then last year in July, same time, we started our phase 2 to try and identify where, from our results from the shovel test, where those most productive tests were. Then we opened up square units to try and identify more about the integrity of these spaces, if these structures actually maintain a level of integrity, and trying to recover some kind of cultural material from within these walls and corners. So it happened in stages to get to the point where we're now partnering with large different factors of collaboration with National Park Service and SEAC and other universities to bring together a larger project. And so my project is just for my dissertation, but it's expanding quickly. So the significance of what I'm doing is a continuation of previous work by Dr. Hardy, by Bill Sissel and Kenneth Wild. All of these people have started this, and now we're taking it one step further. So this is the first excavation to really focus wholeheartedly on the royal enslaved Africans that were living here in Christiansted in this urban environment, property of the King of Denmark, but they're working and living next to Danish officers in this urban compound. So this gives us an opportunity to talk about not only an aspect of slavery that's not really addressed, talking about slavery in Danish West Indies, talking about an urban condition of enslavement, far removed from a plantation context, and in a closer proximity, social distance to Danish military officers, and talking about people who are serving elite factions of society. So these are a lot of different components to a study that has not been widely addressed in African diaspora research up until this point. So now we can talk about all this and bring this all together in one site. And this gives us new information on slavery in the Danish West Indies, but also allows us to start comparing different forms of enslavement, urban versus rural, island versus more landlocked temperate environments, Danish versus American governments. So there's a lot of different factors and variables that we can now start comparing different forms of enslavement. So with the phase 2 fieldwork, we opened 3 units last year, July 2015, and we'll start with our activity areas. We focused on areas 1 and 2. Area 3 is of course under a layer of asphalt right now. But we're focusing on the specific activity areas for these enslaved Africans, both dating to 1780, what's called Negro houses, and the 1803 Negro chambers. And that's how they're identified on historic maps, but written in Danish. So I am not choosing to use those words. So Unit A that we opened up, this was our first unit, revealed a possible remains of a partially preserved conch shell floor, but it's been heavily disturbed from modern utility lines and underground water lines, so it's only partially intact. But from our previous excavations from Kenneth Wild, right after Hurricane Hugo hit, a tree blew down and actually exposed a very cleanly preserved conch shell floor. So we're thinking that this could potentially be the remains of that conch shell floor, but with all the modern disturbance that's happening, we're only seeing bits and pieces of it now. So now we know potentially where these structures are, but we're taking it one step further. And opening Unit C, we moved our location to approximately where those 1780 Negro houses were. And from that one unit, this is where we got approximately the majority, like 80% of the metal artifacts that we were covering in our assemblage came from this one unit. And this was taken down to a depth of about 50 centimeters, so this is right at the level of those anomalies that Dr. Hardy was talking about. And here, we actually uncovered the partial remains of a ballastone floor. And these ballaststones were laid into a mortar and plaster floor, kind of in a linear arrangement, but again, it's been heavily disturbed. But this area was actually not very disturbed, but it's still only partially intact from what we can see today. But we're calling this a ballaststone floor and trying to identify what it might have looked like originally from the stable yard. And we took a look at that, brushed it through, took a little sample, and tried to identify, okay, this is, in the stable yard, we have an intact ballaststone floor. Can we imagine this possibly could be what this originally looked like in this area? So we're getting partially a glimpse of what this floor might have looked like for these enslaved Africans. Now, updating you to this month's excavations, Unit F was my baby, and we just did a 1 by 1 meter unit, but it was strategically placed right next to Unit C from last year to try and identify, okay, is this partially the remains of a structure? Can we see where this is going? So, once we open this up, took this down to around the same depth of 50 centimeters, we found 2 historic features. And feature one, we're identifying as a possible base of a chimney or baking house. We saw the historic maps that Dr. Hardy already put up where they moved the baking house once they put in Hospital Street. So this is right in the same location of where that relocated baking house might have been. And as you can see, we have this circular configuration. All this white material right around this circular earth is ash and plaster flooring. So this is the base that you're looking at. And feature two, will you?
Can you go to the screen to point out?
Oh, sure. I usually have my pointer. So this right here is what we're calling feature one. This is this base of a possible chimney or possible brick oven. And so in feature two, down here, this line of stone, this is a possible foundation. And this is the same structure that Dr. Hardy pointed out that's lining up right with the northeast corner of this building, the Guinea Company warehouse. And as we know, at one point, all of these structures share a wall. So the fact that this is lining up right with the wall is exactly what we wanted to see. So, and then talking about why it's challenging to really identify context in this urban environment, this is a drawing, a rendering from 1815, and this gives you just an artist rendition of what the wharf complex would have looked like back in the plantation era of this island. And you see a lot of activity happening, and the structures are, of course, changed from today. And so here you're seeing Danish military operations going right along next to people carrying on social conversations. People are carrying different wares to sell on their heads. There are carts driving through, horses driving through, people loading things on and off of ships, animal herding going on. So there's a lot of activity happening. And of course, we can't assume that this is exactly what was happening, but we can start to imagine why it might be challenging to try and identify a group of objects, an artifact, and then attribute that to one group of people in this urban environment. So that's why it's so important for us to try and identify within the walls of these structures the cultural material that would be attributable to the enslaved Africans. So that's why we're trying to get within these walls, within these structures, to really try to attribute this group of artifacts to this group of people, okay? So, men and women at work. So for the Royal Enslaved Africans, from historic sources, we do have a long list of skills that are attributable to this community. Interpreters, porters, waymen, message carriers, it runs the gamut. But now with these new archaeological excavations, we can start to expand on the list of skill sets that these people had developed, possibly baking and agriculture. We have a sample of a metal hoe back there in one of the trays for you to look at. and horse handler, farrier, and of course people who were trained in the foot care of horses would possibly also be trained in blacksmithing. And we do have evidence that there was a blacksmith shop on site. So we can start to now expand the range of skill sets that these people had developed and were using to survive in this urban environment. So from the phase 1 and phase 2 survey, we've got approximately 5,000 artifacts. They've already been returned to the fort here, so they are still living here. They're not living in Tulsa. So we have different kind of artifact groups, and within those artifact groups, we have different classes of wares. And for architectural material, this is the most abundant, in terms of weight, this is the most abundant artifact class we have. Thank you. And so, from the architectural material, we're seeing a diversity of different types of materials being used to construct buildings, not just brick and mortar. They're using cut coral, stone, shell, nails, all these different things, and things that are abundant on the island that are hurricane resistant, fire resistant. Christiansted was one of the first towns to actually have a building code. So you'll have this building code that's requiring the use of fire-resistant and hurricane-resistant materials. So they're using these materials for a reason. And then within the housewares group, we're finding not only European ceramics, but Afro-Crucian ware, locally made pottery by enslaved Africans. So they're not only producing their own wares, they're able to somehow procure wares, European wares, somehow contributing to the economy, either through trade or purchasing it themselves. It's assumed that the royal enslaved Africans had an increased access to luxury goods, but that's still to be determined. So we do have faunal remains, and we do have a lot of utilitarian objects. I mentioned a lot of metalworking, and we have slag, but also the end products of metalworking. So a lot of different utilitarian objects that are made of metal were found from that one unit C that I mentioned. So just to give you a visual picture of the assemblage, the most abundant artifact class we have is glass by count, but by weight it looks a little different. And then metal and shell, and a lot of the metal is coming from that one unit that I mentioned. So with the architectural material, I mentioned there's a diversity of wares that they're using, and this gives you an image of some brick, conch shell. These are roof tiles and some cut coral. And these are very large implements, so they stay here. And with the glass artifacts, we're finding, of course, they're very heavily patinated shards. But from what we can tell, we can find a lot of the bases, and the bases and the kick-up base inside of the bottles are giving us an indication of a relative date. And these are dating to right around in the 1800s, early 1800s. So this is excellent for us. And then with the metal artifacts, like I mentioned, they're using a lot of different tools, and this metal hoe that's pictured here is right behind you. And they're using a diversity of different skill sets here, and metalworking seems to be one of them. And then the comparison between European ceramics and Afro-Crucian ware. This is Afro-Crucian ware on your right and European ceramics on your left, so you can see some of the difference here. And then for the faunal remains, we actually did a basic zooarchaeological analysis at my lab at the University of Tulsa, and we first looked at the faunal remains recovered from the royal enslaved residences and the faunal remains recovered from Dr. Torres's excavation in 2014 when the mahogany tree stump was removed. So we now can compare the faunal remains recovered from the Danish warehouse that the Danish officers were using and the potential enslaved African residential spaces that we have. So for these two comparative groups, we're finding that the faunal remains from among the enslaved Africans are primarily small mammalia, and from the faunal remains from the Danish officers' warehouse, primarily Bos taurus, which is cow, and larger mammals are being recovered from their areas. And when we looked at the exterior markings on the bones, we're now finding more evidence of what's called pot polish. And that pot polish, that shiny residue that you'll see actually developing on bone, is just evidence of bones being boiled and stewed for long periods of time. And so with that pot polish, we can already just further confirm what we already knew about Afro-Caribbean cooking practices. a lot of students being served. And another thing that we're finding that it's not showing on this graph, but what's called, actually, if you look in this corner, we have a lot of what's called green breaks or spiral fractures on the bones, and that's evidence of intentional marrow removal. So that's evidence of someone actually taking a long bone, twisting it with a torque motion, breaking it open to try and extract the marrow out and get as much nutrients out of that bone as possible. So the fact that we're finding that kind of traits on the bones from the enslaved African residents is telling us that this is a resourceful group of people. And they're doing the best with what they have. So,
On the left there? Oh, here, to the left.
so this is the pot polish I was talking about. You can see the shine on it. This is some hack marks, but this right here is the spiral fractures. You can actually see this twisting motion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're seeing hack marks, we're seeing saw marks, we're seeing pot polish, but what's interesting about this is from the remains from the enslaved African residences, all the bones that we found had evidence of pot polish or cut marks or saw marks. Only one bone, that one in the corner, had evidence of burning. And it's the exact opposite when you're looking at the remains from the officer's warehouse. Most of those had evidence of roasting or burning. So you're seeing a difference in cooking practices right there. So some preliminary conclusions. This is a picture from Dr. Torres' excavation. When that mahogany tree stump was removed, this tile floor was exposed. So this is what the flooring possibly looked like for this Danish officer's warehouse where they're storing their goods. And then this is the floor from my unit C, potentially where the 1780 enslaved African residential spaces were. So you're seeing a difference in flooring, but this could be the difference between different building periods. What kind of material was available at the time when these two structures might have been built. So there's a host of different reasons why you would see a difference here, and not just because you have an enslaved and free status people. So we're starting to compare what these structures might have actually looked like. What was it like here in this urban environment? There's a lot of questions we still have yet to answer. So in conclusion, the possible residency spaces belonging to these royal enslaved Africans, what we're finding are more evidence of their working lives. We still have a lot to learn about what their daily lives were like, what their routines were like, what was it like having community and family. I mean, there's a lot of questions that we still have to answer about this urban environment. And then there's actually just more evidence that this community had an immense amount of skill, and their working roles in this community was way more than just warehouse workers. They were the ones actually building the materials here, building these constructions, and making this whole city and colony work. So the Danish officers would have been highly dependent on their skills to survive in this urban environment. And then for the faunal remains, like I mentioned, the enslaved community, we're seeing more evidence of smaller mammals, and the Danish officers are seeing more evidence of larger mammals being eaten. And so with the possible foundations that we've discovered, we can now talk about, okay, what's partially preserved out there. There's still a lot to investigate. We've already benchmarked things for next year, and we're now just trying to confirm and trying to really get more strong evidence for where these structures are, and trying to expose them for the future to see what these materials look like and where these people were living, how they were living, and further just expose their story. So I want to acknowledge a lot of my research sponsors, the University of Tulsa. Our research is also funded by the National Science Foundation and the American Anthropological Association. And I've gotten a lot of support from local partners like Earth Angle, and a lot of excavation support for sure from the University of Virgin Islands, National Park Service, and the Youth Conservation Corps. And none of this would have happened without people really willing to collaborate with me as an outside partner, Ms. Star, of course, and Dr. Meredith Hardy, and my advisor, Dr. Thomas Foster. So all these people, had they not come together and supported my research here, I wouldn't have been able to even conduct anything. So thank you very much. And that's it for me.
One final note, one of the reasons for slave experts working with the with soon-to-be Dr. Odewale, is reaching out and providing these experiences to students from here and from around the world. I'd like for our interns to come up here for a minute. Come on. I want to get, this one's not working. So what I want to get is everyone's opinion. So what I want to get is just a few words from each of our interns about their experience this summer. So we'll start with Ms. Megan. Introduce.
I'm Megan Park. I graduated with an anthropology degree from the University of Texas in San Antonio. This hasn't been my first archaeological project, but I really enjoyed this one. It's my first time working with the actual community and being so close to everyone in the area and working on a big project. And I really enjoyed that, especially coming from anthropology.
Hello, not used to speaking on microphone. My name is Gita Vestergaard. I'm a student at Aarhus University, studying sustainable heritage management, so that's not archaeology. I don't have any, or I didn't have any archaeological skills when I started, but I definitely have now, thanks to these lovely people down here. I think I'm only in the beginning, so I'm going to be here until December, and I'm beginning to really understand that what really went on here. The story is really unspoken in Denmark, and it's not something that we learn a lot about. Whether it's because we're ashamed or if we don't care, I don't know what the reason is, but it's interesting for me really to get an insight. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Jordan Rogers. I'm a business student at the University of Virgin Islands. Just like my friend Gita, I've never had any archaeological experience at all. So being able to be a part of this whole project is allowing me to gain these the skills to do this type of work and understand what actually takes place on a daily basis for our archaeologists. Being a part of the community, actually learning more about my home and gaining knowledge of how these people lived at that time period, it's just a great experience, and it's a very amazing thing to learn.
Good night. My name is Tiara de Costa. I am a student at the University of the Virgin Islands, and I also have no archaeological experience. My major is actually psychology, so it's like pretty far.
Yeah.
But I just had a deep interest for finding out more about history, and especially my history. And this has been the most amazing experience ever. I have learned so much. And I've also learned some tips on archaeology. So now I have some archaeological experience. And I just find it amazing that how you could learn so much from these little artifacts and just using science to discover your past or anyone's past. And I just love it. So far, I love everything.
Your turn.
Okay. It is really loud. So I'm Michelle Gray. I work at Southeast Archaeological Center, as I introduced myself, or Meredith introduced me earlier. So, I mean, it's been an absolutely incredible experience to be here. I mean, it's an absolute honor. The archaeology here is really unique. You have so many different components going on. You have the Danish component, but you also have a lot of other European influences in the Danish West Indies. And to see all those things interact, along with the slavery aspect of the Danish West Indies, is really, really interesting, and it's really important, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to uncover what we're going to have the next couple summers. And also, I just absolutely love my interns. They're like the best interns you could possibly ever ask for.
Yes, they are.
So, yeah, thank you so much for coming tonight, and I really hope that everybody here continues to play a part in what we're doing here at the Danish West Indian Guinea Complex excavation.